Narnia, this will be your third round in Reader's Labyrinth, sir. How you doing tonight?
Still standing after a third. Don't stop the fight. I'm round three. Let's get it going. This is going to be a good one.
Well, this is awesome. I have hopefully this is going to be a 20-round boxing match. So this is going to be something that hasn't been seen in boxing, at least in the past 4 years. So we're going to make some history here. For all of our listeners who are joining us, this is Soren Narnia. He is the author, producer, and writer and creator of the Knife Point Horror series. And there will be a link in the show description where you can find it. He also has a Patreon as well, so you can zip by there and check him out. There will be a link to that as well. And my personal favorite, those snowy nights you read to me, they'll never be forgotten. And I have Soren's word that he is not going to let that go by the wayside. He said he's going to work on that.
You have my word, sir. You have my word.
His word of honor. And the word of a hobbit.
Just my word. Let's just call it my word. Okay. I don't know what honor has to do with anything. Jeez.
It means something. It still means something, Soren. So for our listeners, me and Soren were kind of chatting offline, and he had a brilliant idea where each of us could come up with a list of our favorite books that influenced us and kind of shaped who we are as an intellectual, a writer, and a creator, and really just what kind of helped make us the human beings that we are today. Because as O'Brien told Winston in 1984, no author is by himself when he publishes a book. There are 1,000 silent voices of authors that he's read before him. So I have a list of 10 of my favorite books. But what I decided to do is we're going to let Soren enlighten us all on the first 5 books that is on his list. So Soren, I will let you take it away.
All right. Yeah. And then in compiling my list, I was really thinking about kind of the books that, as you mentioned, really kind of sort of shifted me, sort of changed me. I may have books that I reread and even enjoy the reading of more than these, but these will go down in my personal history as shape-shifting in some way, or personality shifting. The first book, and I'm going to go in chronological order. There was a little thing when I was a kid given to me by my Aunt Grace. It was called The Pink Panther, Adventures in Zealand. Okay, so this was, you have to imagine, this was a little book like kind of the size of a chunky bar. The size and thickness is very thick, just a few words on each page, maybe 50. And it was also a flip book. So it was telling a fascinating adventure of the Pink Panther. Always a treat, right? But it was also, you could also flip the pages and get a little animation up on the upper right. And I was so fascinated by this. And I think the reason, this was the book that kind of kicked off my my real fascination with books as the physical object of a book, and how it could change and how it could vary. How some could have photographs and text, some could be shaped differently, some could be just different formats. So to this day, I think that little stupid Pink Panther book, which I never even made it through, I've just been riveted. Anytime I'm in the bookstore and I see some different shape or some different form, or someone has tried something different with the physical structure of a book, I get very excited and I want to investigate. And that was the one that did it. God bless its little tiny drugstore purchased heart.
That's amazing. Oh yeah, and
yeah.
A book that almost made it on my list was A Christmas Story, and my mother had it, and this was a pop-up book, and it had like little levers in it, and you can move characters, and it was interactive on a level that a lot of books when I was when I was younger, I just never really encountered that. Yeah. And to really kind of see it and experience it in a 3D mode too. So that sounds pretty good. So how old were you whenever you had the Pink Panther book?
Oh, I was probably maybe 6, but then I went out and got the whole series. I just that chunky bar shape and size just really fascinated me. And then imagine just like maybe a year later when I was given my first, it was called the Book and Record Set, where it was a comic book, but there was a 45 LP in the back, and you played the LP as you followed along in the comic. Which was
yeah.
And that's the kind of thing. I just love that kind of experimentation with books, because a book doesn't have to be just the same thing that we see all the time. Text on a page with a tasteful binding. It can be all kinds of wacky stuff. So that was that one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Now
sure. And
so go ahead.
oh, no. Go on, please, Soren.
Well, let's move up a few years later. And I know that you have strong feelings about this book. I was given by my grandmother my first copy of Dracula. This was as I recall, it was a Scholastic edition, so it was heavily abridged. Because I was still just a wee lad. I didn't have the sharpest reading skills. But between the story, of course, of Dracula and these weird, interesting illustrations, this kind of like a black, white, and blue motif in these full-page illustrations, I was riveted. That was my intro to Dracula. It wasn't until a few years later I sat down and look at this huge, this book goes on forever. This is the real thing. But that was it. And of course, Dracula was just, I think it was a life changer, because that to me was what horror was. It was my first real dose of it, I think. I'll never forget that. And you also, Frank, with
Oh,
Dracula.
yes. Oh, that's right. Yeah. So I guess this would be a good point for me to talk about it. So the version of Dracula that I had, there were two versions that kind of hit home to me. One of them was a graphic novel version of is it the 1990 or 1991? But it was Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
And, looking back on it now, this was, it was essentially some propaganda for the movie is what it was. But, in the cinema, in the cinematic way that Francis Ford Coppola had, with all those colors in it, the hues of red, the oranges, the blues and grays, especially, just how they all whirled together, is what really got me interested in Dracula. And then my mother, she rented a copy of the Penguin Classic, which was, the Dracula. And I want to say I was in 7th grade when I read it all the way through. And I had kind of a love-hate relationship with reading, but along with the Goosebump books, which we can get into a little bit later, when I was in grammar school and middle school, Dracula really helped kind of initiate me into the world of reading, because that's when I realized, hey, do you know what? There's a really interesting story here, but the format it's being presented in, the prose it's being written, I'm very unfamiliar with this. But that's when I really had an awareness that some authors were really, really good with prose. They were almost poetic with it, and other ones were strong in dialogue. And that's when I began to realize, A, hey, reading can be really, really fun for me. And B, authors are different folks. They're not all going to write the Goosebump books, and they're not all going to write one certain way. And just reading the Dracula book is where I began to absorb the idea that, hey, I've been reading these kind of, scary books, the Goosebump books, but horror as a genre goes much, much deeper. Just think of all of the themes in Dracula that you and me could go all night. But the most powerful and latent scene that stuck out in my mind was when Lucy, had been attacked by Dracula in the form of a wolf, and reading the diary that Jonathan Harker had read, that her mother had written, of seeing the wolf's head in the window. It's, trying to climb into the window. That has always stuck in my mind. This just relentless monster from your subconscious, some real monster from myth, however you want to, nip and tuck it. But whenever I finished the book, I felt like I was slightly traumatized somewhat. Mm-hmm. And the religious elements in there, because all the adults around me believed in religion, and there's this strong religious component in Dracula. It just kind of added a realism to it. So Dracula was definitely near the top of my list, I have to say.
Yeah, it's interesting, because when the first time I read it, I was too young to grasp almost any of the themes. And all I felt was that real visceral horror.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And of course, I've never really been able to feel just that again, because as you say, it's loaded with all kinds of other good stuff. But just imagine, I'm a kid and I'm just reading that, and slowly coming to realize that the structure and the style of it is so wonkier than so much of what I was used to. It has that, you got the epistolary format, and then when we have the letters, and then it's switching. It's weird that it has the first third of it is set in just one place basically, and then it completely breaks away from that location to kind of England, and then we're wandering across the countryside. Even that structure is really sort of unusual. It's got it all. It's got it all. Let's call it what it is. Dracula. Tough to beat.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I don't mean to take to have any kind of flex toward Bram Stoker, but if we look at writing today, I've run across this mindset on Twitter and other forums and some of the folks I've been speaking to, but they have this idea that all writing in the past was like perfect and pristine, and that the writing now, especially with the rise of independent media, it's all gone super, super dirt. I mean, it isn't really good quality. But I have to say, like, I'm like, guys, have you read Dracula recently? It's a great story, powerful themes. It has some aha moments in it. But I'm like, look, realistically, 40% of that book, it either could have been cut, it could have been rewritten by like a really good editor. I'm like, guys, writing in the past, like writing today, you're going to have your home runs, and you're just going to have your bell winners. I mean, it's just so.
Yeah, Van Helsing goes on and on and on. And
oh man, yeah.
Some of his monologues, man, like snippety snip. But it was a different time. People were okay with that sort of pace, and so.
Well, his monologues were always on the boring moral stuff, and I'm always like, hey, give us a theory on the vampire. Like you alluded to that, you were into like the occult and theosophy and stuff like that. Let us know the metaphysical dimension of what you're facing. How is it that the sacraments are interacting in a created realm with a creature that's come from an immaterial dead realm? I know that you're thinking about that, Van Helsing. I don't want to hear about poor Lucy. I've already heard about poor Lucy and her innocent soul and all that, but yeah. Yeah,
Fortunately, when I read it now, of course, I hear Anthony Hopkins' voice, so it does make it funny. It's just so funny in that part. Oh, all right, Dracula. We can talk endlessly about that, but let's move on to another literary classic.
For God's sake, strike now.
One of the books that changed me as a child. It's, of course, the one that everyone knows. This is the 1981 NFL Record and Fact book. So, as you might imagine, there's a bit of a story here. My mother was big into yard sales. She would always bring me something from yard sales, a toy, a game, very often book. So as a little kid, starting to get into sports. So the weird thing about this NFL Record and Fact book from 1981, and an odd feature toward the back, it gave like a 500 word capsule summary of every single game played in the previous season. So to me, it was like a little story. And I read, sitting there as a kid, I read through every single capsule summary of every game in order, kind of experiencing that NFL season as this prose narrative and kind of being enthralled with it. And I think what that began was like my enjoyment of sports as just like ongoing, completely unpredictable story. Like I'm watching a storyline play out. That's kind of interesting because it cannot be really controlled. So when everyone else is screaming their head off, I often think to myself, that's an interesting twist. I think I like that. Not the direction I would have gone. That is an interesting twist. So that is how I began to appreciate sports and all their complete absurdity. It was because of reading that section of that one book. And again, thanks to eBay, I went back and I bought it again recently. I'm like, yeah, there they were. I sat there reading this as a child, reading every single one of these.
So I have recently developed a deeper appreciation of sports since marrying my wife in 2017. And she is an Ohio State fan. Now before, and a lot of that just has to do with with my background and how I was raised. But as a family, we were never really into sports all that much. But since marrying my wife, who is also a Kindle Vella author as well in her own right, she has slowly introduced me to the world of football, especially college football. And I have to say, like, in a lot of, what really kind of drew me to history, especially to major in history, is just the human struggle and trying to overcome these obstacles. And I can really see the human story being played out in these college sports. I mean, I can see it. And a deep lesson in life that had eluded me up until I married my wife and I sat down on a couch and watched college football is that the things in life, some of them have meaning apart from us as human beings, but some of them get their meaning strictly because we like it, and it means something to us. And so, whereas before with football, I was kind of indifferent to it. Just listening to you talk, I can just see that there's an implicit value that comes from human beings enjoying the NFL. And even if it's the 1980-81 season, and years and decades later, Soren Narnia, he comes along and he justifies some guy that put it up on eBay. So,
Babe, $12
that's
I
awesome.
could shell out for that thing. Yeah. Yeah. I always thought that one of my, something I would have liked to have been was, and I guess I would call it a sports sociologist. I thought, man,
Cool.
that'd be
Yeah.
a cool job to write about the powerful effects of sports on society and why it is that every society throughout history has this major sports section in the newspapers, because it's gripping on some odd human level. And what I always look for, just from a narrative perspective, is I look for the pain of defeat. I'm fascinated by the fact that if you watch the World Series, it's Game 7, and one team knows they're going to lose. Here you have like this multimillionaire who's making $50 million that year in real, genuine pain on the bench because he knows he's going to lose. It's like, wow, that's a weird, that says something about us psychologically. So to me, the sports as human narrative motif began for me with that book, and it's always stayed on. I've tried to write about sports sometimes, just for my own amusement. Maybe I will again, but maybe not. All right. Next one. Well, it's the good old-fashioned Norton Anthology of Literature. And I don't know which edition that I'm talking about. I was just one day as a kid, 12 or 13, I saw one of these on a table. I think my brother may have been going to community college at that time, and I just picked it up and I started leafing through it. And the first page I opened to, it was a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks. I forget the name. It's her famous poem about the pool players. And that was the first poem I ever read that really kind of got me with its like expertise. Like, wow, that's so cool. And I flipped a little further and I found another poem that was really good, and another one and another one. And then, mixed in with the Norton Anthology, you have short stories and commentary. But that was my introduction to like really great poetry, which I don't recall ever being taught for a second in school up until that moment. Maybe even in high school. It just was not a thing. And that book sort of threw it in my face in a very good way, because the Norton Anthology of Literature, they know what they're doing when they pick this stuff. And those poems that I found there that day got me. Every single one of them got me in some way. And since then, I've always had like an appreciation for poetry. I'm always kind of pursuing like, I'll read like 1,000 of them before I find just the one that's just, oh God, that is so good. It reminds me of how good they can be. The fishing is frustrating. It very often is. But I think since I picked up that one book, it changed me. It made me appreciate really good poetry.
Is there a book with some authors and titles of some of the poems that have just gone boom for you, just giving you some home runs?
I have on my shelf, I have like 30 poetry anthologies. And what I've learned about poetry is that it's never one author that I just can follow and just embrace everything they do. It's always just so random, so random. So I'll get, the year's best poetry anthology or 300 classic beloved poems from this or that. And I'll see them in a used bookstore and I'll buy them, almost every single one. And I'll just slowly go through them. And I will put a red dot on the pages where my favorites are, because that's how random it is. It's rare that I think of authors, I think of, let's see, Elizabeth Bishop. She usually comes through for me, or Wallace Stevens, but it's so hit and miss. It's so hit and miss. I couldn't even tell you the name of a single anthology that is superior to any other.
I can't remember what version of Norton's, of the literary classics that I read, but it was in there that I discovered The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. The poem was in there.
Some good stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That was a hard hitting one, but
yeah. There's just a moment when you come to the last line of a poem that gets you, especially when it's the last line that gets you, that just reminds me.
Oh yeah, for sure.
This can be so amazing, so amazing. And then I go off and I watch a horror movie, and I don't read poetry again for like 6 months. That's
So I have a follow-up question about the Norton anthology. Whenever you were reading it in school, do you think the experience of reading with a group is better? Is it different? Or, whenever you're reading a book by yourself?
Oh, I would absolutely prefer that 20 people I know are also reading something. I think book groups are a fabulous idea.
Oh, I love them. Yeah.
Partially why I don't read so much is that feeling that sometimes you're reading a book like, no one I know is reading this. I'm all alone reading this.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Who can I enthuse with in social media? That's too one way. It's not going to do it. I've considered just taking a night class, just like, because they'll assign me things and everyone else will be assigned them too. That's great. I think that's great.
I would be totally down if we had like the Soren Narnia book club and we could come on here and we could talk about it. I'd be totally down for something like that. Maybe spend a month in our off hours, just knock out a novel or so, or a series of short stories, and just kind of give our feedback on it. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Picking just the right thing would be, oh boy. Well, it could be done. So it's definitely, it's on the table. All options are on the table.
Awesome. That is awesome. We're taking a comparative approach.
Books again. All right, and number 5 in the first round, Wuthering Heights. I know, Frank, that your wife is very partial to this one.
Yes, right? She is. That is probably her favorite book. Mm-hmm. I would have to say, because we've made about 3 moves, and I want to say that she lost her copy of Wuthering Heights, and it says a lot when somebody says that they like a book. They lose a copy of the book, but then they go back out and they buy another copy of it, even though they've read it about 5 different times.
Sure.
I read Wuthering Heights in high school and I read it in college. So I've gone through it about twice. My wife and me must have watched it. Yeah. Okay, good.
It's a high school read for me too. And I think as old as I get, I will never really forget all the high school reads. There's just something special about them. There's just
for sure. Well, there's that group thing. Everyone is off and they're taking this adventure together and they're exploring something. So
and we were so impressionable and we were not yet jaded. Every book we read was going to be special. But for me, what made Wuthering Heights so interesting, and I really liked the story. I thought it was very well done. I was just engrossed. But this was the first time. Because I was a dumb child. I was like 16 when I read. I had no life experience. I had no world experience. I thought people in the past were kind of an abstraction. And Wuthering Heights was the first time I actually felt really connected to the people of the past and what they felt and what they experienced. I'm not sure why Wuthering Heights did that. Maybe because the emotions in it were so raw and the people were so flawed. That I thought, as I put it down, like I really felt like I was there in a way that not even Frankenstein did for me. Wuthering Heights was it. I thought, yeah, these people, they lived and breathed. We were all the same across history, and I got one of my first appreciations for history itself, and the livingness and the how tangible those people really are. It really made me think about those the past a lot, and that has never left me. So I credit Wuthering Heights for doing that for me.
Wuthering Heights had this really, really cool. There was always this tension in there, like, and there was always this open-ended question, like, is what's the events that happen to the characters and the tragedies at the very end. Well, is this something that was fated by time or the environment or the universe, or is there something about their characters that just kind of compelled them to make the decisions and actions that they took? Like, was there ever any free will in it? And it was almost Thomas Hardy-ish, I guess, in the approach of the novel, but that was always some tension and conflict that I really appreciated in it.
There was certainly a Thomas Hardy level of misery.
Oh yeah,
Heights.
For sure.
Absolutely,
for sure.
absolutely. Yeah, we used to talk a lot about free will versus choice in English class. I remember that. It would always confuse me because I still hadn't formed the notion. I didn't really know what fate. I didn't think that was a possibility when I was young. I thought, well, what do you mean? Of course we have free will. Look, I'm holding this pencil up. I came to school today. What are you talking about? Fate, destiny. What's that about? Like I say, not the sharpest tool in the shed.
Well, not only that, but I think that we also had a lot of the cards were kind of stacked against us. I mean, my whole years in public school, I never had one logic class. I never had a philosophy class. I was never taught to think critically. So when they came at me with these categorical imperatives like, hey, Frank, what's free will? What's determinism? What's blah, blah, blah in these English classes. And then, I can remember the English, our instructors almost taking this, like, kind of this pedantic view towards us. Like, they had this power that they were able to kind of hold over our heads with these categorical imperatives, but we had never been exposed to it before, which is a real sad thing, because my late grandfather, before he passed, he told me that when he was in middle school, they had logic 1 and 2. And he said, by the time, they had to high school, they had a foundation in philosophy. And now it was the American and analytical philosophy, what the British would term, is it continental philosophy, I think is what the Brits would call it. But they had a firm grasp of these imperatives. And so, one of the things, I guess, whenever our planet Earth goes into the wormhole, and there's an alternative reality, I would always love to be in a classroom with my grandfather when he was my age then, and have a teacher ask him the same thing. This farm boy, but guess what? Right. He knew his imperatives. He had his logic, a solid foundation in philosophy. I wonder how he would have answered him,
Yeah.
So,
well, I sometimes wonder how my life would be different if, when I went to first grade, up on the wall they had a poster of all the faulty arguments. That poster, have you ever seen, you got a list of fault, because that to me is absolutely essential learning for any human being right off the bat. How to know when people are full of it, how to know when you yourself are full of it. If we could all learn how ridiculous our arguments are, maybe we could speak to each other more logically. So, but alas, that poster was not on the wall. I never was until I saw it like in my 30s, by which time it was too late for yours truly.
Which time it was too late.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are my first 5.
Okay, all right.
Now I will settle in and listen to some Frank talking.
Well, some Frank talking. We're going to have some Frank talk here in the Reader's Labyrinth. So at the very top of my list is, of course, your classic Goosebumps by R.L. Stine. I love them all. I know that there's like, you have your old school Goosebump books that were written in the 90s, which is when yours truly here first was exposed to them. And you have some of I know that his writing has kind of taken a little bit of a turn after that, but I am not ashamed to admit that I have a box full of them somewhere. They're probably still under the house. I need to get them out, but they are there. And the reason why, so let me back up a little bit. My belief about reading And one reason why there's something of a decline in reading now is because to learn the art of reading as a discipline and practice, there's almost this initiatory experience. You need to have someone who's older, who knows how to read. They have a lot of experience to show you what a book is, where you can find a book, where you can pick a book up. And then there's this solitary venturing where you are partaking in a mental practice where the author is creating a world inside of your head. And that VR part of your brain is getting spun up. And if you've never read before, and us, reading is second nature now, but it's also a skill. And I can remember acutely trying to learn that skill and just struggling when I was in grammar school. I didn't really get into the swing of reading until about sixth grade. And that was really because of my home life. I mean, there was some stuff that was going on, but a book was an escape from that. But I was really fortunate when I was younger to have some older folks say, hey, here's a good book. A lot of folks who say that they don't read or they don't like reading, they've never had someone, kind of take them under their wing when they were younger, be like, hey, this is a really good book. Hey, this is going to be a grind at first, but hey, and kind of work them through it, I think. And on top of that, group reading in high school is just going to the wayside now because everyone has laptops and cell phones. And so, but for me, the reason why it's definitely at the top of the list is I probably wouldn't be here now if it hadn't been for the Goosebump books. I can remember when the book fair would show up, the first thing I wanted were the history books and the Goosebump books. And you've never seen 10 bucks run out of a kid's hand, and smelling the books. And I can remember the Goosebump books that had this amazing cover on it of the monster or whatever I would be reading about. And
the book fair itself is worth a 2-hour episode.
It was an
of your show. The book fair was amazing.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Me and my friends always said that the book fair for us is what the carnival was for Ray Bradbury. It was this place of mystery, of secrets, of occult kind of stuff going on. And there was something kind of weird about it, like the adults who were running it, to us kids, there was something a little off about them, maybe even a little bit of stranger danger to them. There was never any kind of like seedy stuff that was going on, but the adults that ran the book fair just had an edge about them. And you just knew, hey, this person with this long beard, and he's got like a bucket of books under his arm. This guy knows something. He's been somewhere, He may have been with Frodo and Samwise, and they may have, he may have seen some stuff. Like, where did he come from? So there was mystery behind it. So it was just the entire experience of the Goosebump books that kind of drew me in. And whenever I reflect back on it, having a teacher in third grade that kind of sat down with me and helped me, read out the sentences and kind of dissect the books and ask questions, because there's so many kids today that don't read. And I think that we find a convenient, a culprit in iPhones and, in social media. But how many of us have sat down with a young person and read to them? Even me with my own family, that's a failing I have. But always try, and I'm forever grateful for the adults in my life that wouldn't let me just give up the act of reading. So.
Yeah, that's great. I'm forever grateful that my parents had a room, we called it the den, where the entire wall was just books, and which was just awesome. An endless source of fascination when you're a kid. All these different everythings. I lived in that room. That was terrific. It's funny. I must feel a little bit of guilt because I took to reading pretty quickly, and it came easily. And it wasn't until I was older in life that I realized, this was, for a lot of kids, it was a struggle. I can't imagine it, but it's not. It's not. Doesn't come easy. Reading. It's not something that's like, oh, you start reading the words and you have a grasp. No, it's not. It's just not that way. So I was very, very lucky. I got right into it. But the Goosebumps, I was working in a bookstore when Goosebumps first landed in a big way. And I remember these slow acceleration of sales until it seemed like, oh, great, here's another selling more Goosebumps. And man, we could not keep that shelf stocked fast enough.
Which is a wonderful problem for any book to have. Wonderful problem for it.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so moving on past that, and I'm going to have to throw down for The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien. And so my explanation for this has two parts, okay? The first part is how I came about to read The Hobbit when I was in 9th grade in high school. So here's a little funny story for you, and this is part of my first part. So I was struggling reading, right? And in 4th grade, we had the accelerated reader program. And every single month, you had to get a certain amount of points in it. The books were always boring. None of the Goosebump books were on it. None of my history books, my books about submarines. For some damned reason, the kids' version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and The Day the Earth Stood Still wasn't on the accelerated reader list. It was just all these other books that I was not interested in. But they had all of Tolkien's books on there is what they had. They had all of his stuff. The complete Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, everything on there. My brother had the opposite problem I had. He picked up reading probably as soon as he was able to cry and start forming words. My brother Mike read all of the Lord of the Rings, including The Hobbit, by the time he was in 4th grade. Okay, so when I was in 4th grade, he was already on like the last book in the Ring series. Okay, Michael saw that I was flunking out the accelerated reader program, so he decided to help his brother out, and he got my username and password, and he went on to the accelerated reader list, and he took The Hobbit, and he passed it for me. My teacher, though, wasn't fooled. No way little Frank had read The Hobbit. But that kind of stuck with me for years. And me and my brother, we will joke about it to this very day. We will joke about it. We'll laugh about it. We have a pretty good, talk about it. But he mentioned in middle school, he says, "Are you ever going to read The Hobbit?" It was almost like a challenge to me. So finally in 9th grade, when my chops were finally up, that was the first book. For the first couple of chapters, I had to slog through it. But then I lost myself in it. And that was my introduction to fantasy and just the archetypal characters that Tolkien has created for us. And so I was able to get through The Hobbit. I was able to enjoy it. I read it again in college, and I got probably 10 times more out of it. And even more than that was the cartoon of The Hobbit. And I'm sure that you've seen that, right?
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned that. Yeah.
I had the book too, the Rankin and Bass tie-in
That's
book.
Right. That's right. That is some of the most powerful animation I've ever seen. And it's really, really good. It had this really weird quality to it. But whenever I was watching the cartoon, I was like, I need to really read this book. So the cartoon, it really inspired me to read it. Plus my brother was kind of, ribbing me to read it. So I finally read it, and The Hobbit was super, super important for me because, it's just one of those books that's a classic, and I think everyone should read it. So,
yeah, do you know what my favorite part of The Hobbit is, Frank? And this is, I guess, what makes me a little bit strange. They assigned it to us in junior high. I read it and was digging it totally. And then it got to the end. And I was so intrigued by Tolkien's choice to end the book by having Bilbo do the slow walk back home, in which he sees all the places where the adventures were held, and he reminisces briefly, but then it's just this, he's got to go home. And we see that entire kind of poignant process. He's tired. That's it. So all these wondrous events that happened, you kind of it's just changed. It's almost a little bit sad, and then finally he gets home, and what an interesting creative choice, I thought, to end it that way with the slow. He just doesn't magically appear back in his chair and say, "Boy, what a wonderful, crazy life I just led." No, we see him slowly walking back. I love that. I love that about The Hobbit. Fine book, really good book, and like you, it's one of the rare fantasy books I actually have read.
That was, well, his gift of world building. I mean, he never spared us the mundane. And because it was out of the mundane that the evil in the world rose to begin with. But the slow grind of Bilbo Baggins as he made his way back to the Shire, yeah, that's right. And it really kind of gave it this very human quality to it, and like our mortality, because it was almost like a kaleidoscope of the entropy of the entire world around us, and like where we're all going to end up, and our story's going to end one day. But this kind of reverse walk of the hero, instead of having an anti-hero.
That's really what it is. It was the mundanity that made it kind of come alive. These places were just sort of fantastical and crazy, and there's big spiders and dragons. But then, as he's walking home, and there's no one left around, there's no more adventure. It's just a meadow. It's just a mountain, and that really made it mundane and yet real, very real.
So I think that was my number 3. Number 4, if we count Dracula, Order of the Dracula. So I'm going to jump to Frank Herbert's Dune, and pretty much all of the Dune books, my friend, all of the Dune books, and this will be my number 5. But wow, that's all I have to say on that. What can one say about that? That is, it is the Lord of the Rings of the sci-fi world, the world building of Frank Herbert's. And you want to talk about the mundane. I mean, whenever Paul Atreides is on the planet Arrakis and he's trying to absorb every bit of moisture that he can get in this just dry environment, I mean, Frank Herbert just puts you in the sands of Dune, is what he does. And I would have to say that, especially earlier in my life, the philosophy of Dune, the world view of Dune, probably shaped my thoughts, the inner landscape of my mind, more than the Bible did, and really more than my philosophy classes did, because it was so, I mean, it was more real than real to me, I guess. And Dune was an escape for me whenever I needed it. And not only that, but Dune seemed to have the answers to a lot of life's questions, is what it had in it. And there's no doubt in my mind that had Frank Herbert wanted to, he probably could have been the next L. Ron Hubbard, as far as, like starting a cult or something like that. But of course he didn't. He had more, some dignity to his character. But the Dune books themselves, I mean, it looms so large in my mind. Oh, and the movie that has come out is just absolutely fantastic. I mean, they deviate from the book on some parts, but it just captures Dune. I mean, 100%. I mean, it is so good. But I mean, Dune is a coming of age story. I mean, it has everything in there for you, is what it's got. So I feel like I could just go on and on and on and on in Dune. But
when I read it, I swear my first thought when I closed the book was, yep, there's no mystery as to why people love this book, because it's got everything, and everything in it I think is interesting. And before that, my first experience with Dune, my first image of this book, there was a board game by Avalon Hill back in 1979. My mother bought it for me from a yard sale again. The cover depicted, what do you think? The sandworm. One giant sandworm. Yeah. And 2 poor Fremen guys looking up at it. That was the cover. I thought, what is this? I didn't even know it was a book then. And then I found out shortly afterward. But I'm like, man, I got to read me some of this, whatever it is. Yeah, it's so big, it's so epic, everything about it is interesting. I think, would you call that sci-fi or fantasy? Like, if you had to, I mean, it's really fantasy. Well, it's, oh man, there's probably arguments all over the internet about that.
So, in my opinion, it's science fiction, is what it is. But it's kind of in this gray area. So from my understanding on some of the past guests that I've had on here, it was explained to me that you have hard sci-fi, which is like The Martian. Okay, here's the math, here's the engineering, here's the science behind it. But you also have what they call soft science fiction. And this is like, and then there's a wormhole and they went back in time. And they don't really explain the physics of it. For me, and some of the guests that, who I've spoken to, they say that Dune is almost in a third category of science fiction. It's almost like philosophy, historical science fiction is what it is. And they say, but there's some really hard science in there. Whenever they talk about the ecology of Dune, and Dr. Leon Niles he's explaining to Duke Leto Atreides, how the systems, they work together, the storms, the spice, the worms, and he's throwing some hard science out that's based in real life climatology is what it is. So Frank Herbert was really kind of doing something on the hard science, but what's the interesting angle of Dune, and this is why I think it is unsettling on some level to so many readers, is that Frank Herbert was, from my understanding and what I can gather with the interviews with him, he was either an agnostic or an atheist. I'm not quite sure which, but Dune is almost a religious tome about human nature is what it is, and the destiny of human nature. And if anyone has ever read God, Emperor of Dune, you really get the religiosity of the human race in it. And this weird part of our psyche that's been carved out for a place for the divine. And I just find that absolutely fascinating in his work. It's like, he shewed religion in his life, yet he created this book that could almost be a religion. It kind of fills that hole in the human soul in it. So, back to your original question, is it sci-fi or fantasy? I kind of think it's in this weird third category is what it is. Because it's like there's some hard science, but there's some hard-hitting religious, philosophical. I mean, you have a philosophy of science, you have ontology, you have all this kind of stuff that's going on in it. And I read all 6 of his original books, and I've read most of the stuff by Brian Herbert as well. So Dune is definitely on there, man. It was one reason why I wanted to major in, or, I ended up double majoring in history and philosophy, and Dune was definitely a big part of that, because I know that I know the ahistorical narrative is a big part of that as well in it. So.
Yeah, I can see that. I could see people, your whole life kind of veering off in a particular direction because of Dune. I firmly put it
because of Frank Herbert, man. I have 2 degrees that are useless, but thank you.
That's okay. I firmly think I would put it in the sci-fi. It's wacky. It's got fantastical elements, but definitely good old science fiction. Once you put something in space in the future, come on, it's sci-fi. But Dune is one of those books that, much like Dracula, I would love to have a poster just of every cover ever done in every edition, or maybe like a jigsaw puzzle. I just think it's so great because it's such fertile ground for an artist.
This is probably
I want to read it again.
Yeah. This is probably the cleanest version I've ever seen of it. I don't know if you can see it on the camera right here, but it has 2 little people, and it's just like the humans are so puny in this world. They're so puny, yet they're so important.
It's but I'll tell you, the new version does not have the soundtrack by Toto.
No, it does not.
The incredible scene where Kyle MacLachlan, and I forget who the other actor is. Is it Jürgen Proch now, riding the sandworm and the swelling music of Toto? I mean, come on, man, come on.
That was great. That so I have the extended version of it, and it's almost 3 hours long. And me and my brother, we must have watched that so many times together. I mean, that is just an entirely other world that David Lynch was able to take us. And I totally understand why folks hated the movie. I completely get it. It's a very, very weird movie, but I don't know. The Dune weirdness is in it, though. The Dune weirdness is there. But
Yeah, it definitely has the weirdness, which is why I will still put it on
I love
sometimes, even though like I can't explain to you what's going on at some point, but it
yeah,
almost doesn't matter. All right, good stuff. So is that your first batch there?
that is the first five, sir. I
All
believe
right.
the ball's in your court, Soren.
Halftime, brief halftime, blah blah blah. Okay, halftime is over.
That's it. I'm gonna
Let's
take a
get
little
back to the
swig.
books. And my last five begins with we got to go with little Stephen King, Salem's Lot. Salem's
I
Lot
knew
only
there was
because
going
it
to be
was
some King love out there.
yeah,
I
of
like that
course
book too.
it was the first one of his I ever read, so it kind of by default. But then it changed me because that started there went my adolescence just reading Stephen King stuff, and it was only later after I'd gone through most of them that I began to appreciate the real skill that he has for creating making characters so recognizable so quickly, where so many other authors can't quite do that. The people in Stephen King's books, I came to see like these are the Americans that I see when I go down to McDonald's. He knows what they talk like. He knows what they sound like. He knows what they want. He knows what they're afraid of, and that's so much what makes Stephen King Stephen King. And Salem's Lot was the first book, and God knows how many hours I've lost to that man in my life. So that's what else can you say?
Oh yes, and Salem's Lot was a really really cool vampire story. I mean, just just kind of standing on its own. I mean, this town, and there were so many of these just really cool elements that were floating around in it too. I mean, and that was the first book by Stephen King. I want to say I was in 10th grade whenever I read it. I'd read Christine before that, but whenever I read Salem's Lot, that's when I really got a sense that the world of Stephen King was bigger than the book I was reading. I'm like, hey, you know what? This vampire came from somewhere, and there's a mythos behind a lot of this. And then in later books, especially his Dark Tower series, I think he goes back to the vampires. And I want to say that what was the priest's name in Salem's Lot? I am drawing a blank
Father
right now.
Callahan? Was it
That's
Father
it.
Callahan?
That's it. Yeah, yeah. And he reappears in the Dark Tower series.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then
right.
we're introduced to like the vampires. You have your type 1s and your type 2s and all. And I was like, man, that's so cool. He was just able to take a little element from this book and weave it into this tapestry. Very, very cool. Really cool experience.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Stephen King. Maybe some people have heard of them.
For some of us.
Let's see. The next book by Kurt Vonnegut. The first book I ever read by Kurt Vonnegut, which happened to be Bluebeard. And from that, I went over and started to read his classics. But when it comes to figuring out how to write prose, that was really dramatically shifted me. Because I thought, well, prose, when you're describing an image, you really want to like get just the wording just right and so forth. And then Kurt Vonnegut wouldn't even have a single adjective in some of his books, and the way he messed with structure and the plain prose that he brought, and especially this was my first introduction to really dark irony. Someone who really got dark irony brilliantly. Really affected me. The way he describes just such bleak things and such dark turns of events, these weird coincidences and so forth. I really wanted to roll. I wanted to roll with that in my own writing. I've always loved that when things come back from the past into the present. All of that, but his deceptively simplistic style of prose was kind of an awakening for me. I thought, you know what? I had been trying too hard all along, and sometimes a car is just a car. It doesn't have to be a bright red car that sounds like, no, you don't have to do that. If you have ideas behind what you're writing, and you have irony, and you have other things, you don't have to describe, you don't have to paint the perfect picture. And that's what I learned from Kurt Vonnegut.
That's really, really cool. And, some of the authors who I've interviewed here on Reader's Labyrinth, whenever they tell me about their learning process as a writer, again, I'm just kind of like, I'm reminded of this initiatory process in reading as well as writing. They came across another writer that wrote the way they wanted to write. And, I think human beings learn best by watching how it's done, so that's really, really cool. And as for stuff from the past that's coming back and the dark irony and stuff, I remember a bunch of your stories in Snowy Nights that really kind of captured that. But instead of going dark, it was almost like an inverse of that. Like you were showing the light in the darkness, especially in what is it, the rim of the $4 soda, I think, or is it the $5 soda? I am sorry, man.
The $8 soda.
The $8 soda. Oh man, I tell you what, that's right. Well, the way the feds are raising the interest rates here, I'm pretty sure that we're going to be seeing that. But yeah, there was some irony in there, but there was also a lot of light in your writing as well, and I really appreciated that, especially in that story. So
yeah, I think I began to see from someone like Vonnegut that you can plant seeds early on in a story that the reader will forget, but if you can come back and connect that initial seed to something later on in an unexpected way, it can be really powerful and beautiful.
awesome.
So moving on, the next book is called Dispatches. This is by Michael Herr. This started out as a series of articles I think he wrote for Rolling Stone. He was a journalist in Vietnam, and he wrote 5 or 6 really extended pieces on his experiences there. And I read Dispatches, in my late 20s, and it was simply the best book I'd ever read. This prose style, which I've never quite seen anywhere else, and that I could never duplicate. This prose so caught the tension and the edginess and the nervousness and the fear and the sort of hallucinatory psychedelia of being a correspondent in Vietnam. I've read it multiple times. I just thought it's such a gem, and it kind of kicked off like an interest in military history. I think I credit Dispatches with that. Reading about how wars come about and how they're fought, and Dispatches does something toward the end, which was really daring. Which Michael Herr sort of argues that the romance of war is something that can't be duplicated, and this is why some people yearn for it, especially men yearn for this because that experience of being in a war is like nothing. Nothing can be like that. It is the epic, the highest, the darkest, the worst, the greatest, most horrifying, most unthinkably huge experience a human being can imagine. And it's not anti-war, this book Dispatches. It shows the horrors of war, but it's not necessarily anti-war, which makes it even more fascinating. But I think a lot of my reading just about history was because Dispatches was so good.
Frank Herbert said that, in his book, God, Emperor of Doom, that, one of the driving forces of the human race is fear of death. And that subconsciously we align ourselves to test ourselves for that final battle, which is death, right? And he says that for women, that's childbirth. Now, guys, I don't necessarily believe this. Okay, this is what Frank Herbert is saying through his character, the God Emperor, right? To his Gola, Duncan, Idaho, who's the head of his all-female army. It's a weird book. But he said, men, the closest we can get, to death is war. And he talked about that was a reason through, for revolutions, for social unrest. It's men testing themselves through violence. Like you were just talking about the Dispatches, to kind of bring themselves to this high mountain peak of awareness of existence and being able to face one day that final battle, which is death for him. And, it's really funny because in an interview with him, he actually talked about Michael Herr. And he did it in a real kind of offhand way, but I just kind of made that connection. And this would have been the then PBS interview with Frank Herbert. And I cannot remember the fellow who was interviewing him, but but he mentioned Michael Herr by name in that interview. It was really, really cool. So
Yeah, this match it does make you kind of see that there's something really dark that just keeps forcing humankind toward this lust for this war as an experience. I mean, it's just ghastly. We never seem to stop. So there's something primal and horrible. But what Herr does is he just kind of shows it to you. Says, "Look, it's out there. I don't know." He doesn't have any solutions either. Yeah, it's like so. I'm terrified. I'm horrified by all wars, and yet I do find there's like a dark fascination to the earth shakingness and how they change history.
oh yeah, and all wars are a miscalculation by one party, and nobody can, nobody has enough strategic vision to see how it's going to pan out. I mean, who would have thought in 1914 that the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand would have led to World War I and the end of the Ottoman Empire that had existed for over 600 years, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, over 400 years, and the Russian Empire. Who would have thought that,
I just read another book about World War I. It's again, you see it demonstrated there where every conceivable party before World War I, after the assassination, they all seem to be in agreement. No, of course we can't go to war over this. This is absurd. That would be a disaster. And yet, day by day, war was coming. But everyone kept saying, "No, this will never happen. This doesn't benefit. This will be terrible." And yet, there was this almost like this primal yearning to make it happen. And the next thing you knew, terror spread across Europe and death, destruction, and horror. Something's going on with the human race. I can't solve it tonight, Frank. All I can do is talk about books.
Well, we are really lucky, Soren, that there is not a brewing conflict between a nuclear regional power and the West and a high flashpoint. We're really lucky that that's not happening in one of the most bloodiest battlefields in European history. Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I just, even as we speak here, we're like somewhere people are just dying, and it just it never stops. It never stops. On that up note, we move on to my second to last book on the list by a man named Spalding Gray, a book called Sex and Death to the Age 14. Now, Spalding Gray was a famous monologuist, most famous for his performances where he would simply sit behind a desk and relate very carefully written and rehearsed narratives of his life. Spalding Gray, that's it. And I first saw the movie Swimming to Cambodia, and I thought, this is the greatest thing ever. This guy, all he's doing is just telling a story. He's just telling a story. He has no visuals really to speak of, and you're just completely swept up. And I picked this book up. This is a book of his earlier monologues, and just seeing the difference between him performing it and then reading the words on the page, it made me really appreciate the words themselves. And I began to be interested in the monologue as like an art form, as a real art form. I think what I like to do basically is I'm doing kind of a cheat. Like I'm trying to do what Spalding Gray did, but I don't have to be on camera. So I overwrite things, and they're not very careful. But I always wanted to do what Spalding Gray does, really. I think I always kind of wanted to just be like, let me sit at a desk and let me just tell you something about something that happened to me. And I've never stopped wanting that. But I sometimes prefer to read Spalding Gray's monologues than to see him perform them, strangely enough, because the words on the page, they're stripped of all his indications, his acting, his kind of fake artifice that he likes to do. That's all gone, and it's just the story of a man's life. That's it. And I'm always fascinated by autobiographical writing that is emptied of all trying to share lessons or morals or trying to make you feel some sort of emotion. And that's what his writing in this book is. It's just, here's some stuff that happened to me. I think you'll find it interesting. I love that kind of writing. And that to me is the Spalding Gray book.
Raw and honest writing. I definitely hear that. Yeah, you know what? It's real funny. Whenever there's a famous person or a powerful person, a member of the elite, whenever they release an autobiography, it's always a subtle and sometimes not so subtle just work of propaganda. I mean, it's like, okay, this is the latest philosophy I've adapted, so I'm going to retroactively apply it to my entire freaking life and make you think that this is what I thought ever since I was a little kid. And everyone has the bad thing they had to overcome, and this is what I really. I mean, it's just I can really spot the self-aggrandizement whenever it's coming out. And I have to say, like, definitely within the first 3,000 words of an autobiography, I can spot it pretty good. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what I like so much about Spalding Gray is that there's no guile there. It's
I like
even
that, yeah.
even the best monologuists, they'll want to have an emotional punch. They'll want to kind of get you. They'll want to kind of sway your emotions. And he doesn't do that. It's like, here's some stuff that happened to me. That's it. You make of it what you want. And I admire that kind of minimalism, it's kind of risk taking, because there's not going to be any emotion stirred by Spalding Gray. He's like, I'm an American citizen. He's passed away now. Here's my life. That's it. I really admire that storytelling. And number one, and these are in no particular order. This is just kind of in the chronological order that I came across these books.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
So my last one is Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End.
Oh, that is a perfect one. That is a good one.
Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke, yeah.
I almost said Isaac Asimov. Because it's now we're getting philosophical here, Frank. Now, can you handle that?
Dun, dun, dun,
can
dun,
you
dun.
handle that?
I'm scared. I'm so scared right now.
All right. Because simply what Childhood's End did for me, apart from being just this epic, great emotional story that, I love it when science fiction also has the feels. But I had always thought that the end of the human race, of course, was the thing to be most feared of. I like how horrible that all this comes to a fiery end or something. Like that's what we all believe, right? Like we've got to save the earth at all costs. What a tragedy it would be. And Childhood's End, which is about a time in civilization when aliens come, and it sort of portends the decline of the human race itself. After I read that book, I thought, you know what? The death of civilization and the human race on Earth and Earth itself, I kind of see Arthur C. Clarke has made me see that it can be just part of the grand, inevitable narrative, and there's a beauty to maybe the transience of Earth. Maybe the fact that we'll all be gone one day in a meteor shower or something like that. Maybe it's sad, it's bittersweet, but I no longer, I don't fear that. I don't think that's the most tragic thing that could ever happen, really. Because the book is so beautifully done. It presents the end of humankind as something that just happens. And it's just part of another cycle of renewal and death that is bigger than we can understand. So the book really moved me in that way. I felt kind of a new sadness for humankind. I think I liked people more in general after Childhood's End, because I began to see us as so impossibly small and dwarfed by events and unable to really change, to create a permanent happiness for the future. We can't do it. Childhood's End made me think it's okay that we'll all be gone sometime. And what more life-changing attitude can a book give you than to no longer fear the end of the human freaking race itself?
Isn't it amazing how an author can take, words in a story, and instead of writing a whole philosophical treatise, have this epistemological sleight of hand in a story and essentially get you to buy into transhumanism. And if you read the book 2001: A Space Odyssey, and especially its sequel, which was 2010: A Space Odyssey. And it was very, very heavy theme in Childhood's End, but the idea of transhumanism. And in 2001, your consciousness is essentially just being downloaded into the server, which is the Leviathan or whatever it is. And in Childhood End, it's like there's this this separation of the form and essence. And it's like the form is gone, but the essence is part of this eternal recurrence thing, that the universe is going through and going through. It's almost Nietzschean-like in its approach to it. But instead of taking us over the bridge of humanity, which is where we're currently at, which is what Nietzsche wanted to do, and bring us to the Superman, right, where we have form and essence that's over this bridge, this new human being, the transhumanist like Isaac Asimov, like, wants to shed the form altogether, and they want to alter the human soul is what they want to do. And that was kind of my takeaway from that, because there was always, the first thing that he attacks and destroys in that book is the idea that there's an ontological truth at all, and that this is the first, like, your perception is your reality, and that's real heavy in that book. And to accept the fate of the human race, this transhumanist future that we have, like our ascendant masters have come out of space, it's very it's transhumanist, which is a huge theme. And it's also a big theme of our cultural elites now. I mean, like, the Musk of the world, the billionaires of the world, they want us to eat bugs and they don't want us to eat meat. And they talk about, hey, you know what? One day the AI is going to be so smart, we'll be able to download our consciousness into machines, kind of like in 2010, and the idea, hey, we don't really need nationalism. We really shouldn't be fighting. We're all blah, blah, blah. And, which you could see that again in Arthur's book, which was 2010. When the Leviathan was telling them that, the Russians and the Americans, they shouldn't be fighting one another. And it's like, there's always this, for me, I guess, as someone that was more grounded in Frank Herbert than Arthur C. Clarke, was, okay, where's the Trojan horse of philosophy? Like, I smell it, it's out. But of course, our elites, they're not going to download in the Matrix. They're going to keep their bodies and make it better. And they're going to get all the babes while we're uploaded into the cloud. That's what it's going to be. But as an escape and just the grand scale of space itself, he presented the vastness of space in Childhood's End through analogy much better, I thought, than in 2001 and 2010. So those were kind of the two main things that I was able to take away from it. But
yeah, he creates this a universe that, when I read the book, it's like, wow, the universe is just so vast and mysterious that, it's okay to just don't even, just stop questioning, just let it be what it is. And if that means that you as human beings must end because something else that you don't even understand, that can't even be explained to you, must happen, then just let that go and accept the end of humanity. And it was kind of a beautiful message. Well, it's not really a message. It's just kind of a beautiful book in that way. Like, wow, I never really thought about that before.
Yeah.
That it's completely natural that the Earth dies, and that all we have struggled for just becomes the nothingness of dust in the universe. That can be a beautiful thing. And maybe I want to wait until after the Super Bowl, of course, because I want to see what happens there. But Childhood's End, epic sci-fi on a truly very epic scale.
Grand scale. Oh, yeah, for sure on that. And I mean, it covers so many subjects and so many areas on it. Really, really great book. Yeah. Now, was that your last one? I am looking.
That's all. Just 10 random things that kind of changed my life in subtle ways. And now we go
random
to the second
and not
half
random.
Of Frank's list.
That's right.
Exactly.
Random and not random. Nature loves to hide, as Heraclitus said. There's some hidden there's a system behind the randomness, I think, in our lives, a synchronicity, who knows. So let's see, I have gone over Goosebumps, The Hobbit, Dune. I've gone over Dracula. So it looks like I've got some more on my list here. So 1984. Oh my gosh. That is on my list. And I think I kind of spurred out in the beginning and I made a William and O'Brien reference quote. I think if anything can sum up the modernist era, the zeitgeist of the modernist mind, is 1984. And it, 2 plus 2 equals 5. It does not equal 4 in the world of 1984. And I'm sure that you can get all the subtle reference points on that, Soren. I'm sure that you've read that. Oceania has always been at war with East Asia is another big one about denying reality, about the idea that that epistemology can be controlled by the culture. If the culture can tell you that, hey, we've always been at war with East Asia, well, if you hand over the power of epistemology to a central government or society, then you've lost the notion of truth. And I think that's what 1984 is about. It's about defacing the human spirit, about ethics, but it's about who gets to decide what is true. Is true something that I think it is, that me and you agree it is, or is it something that's out there? O'Brien's answer to this question is, the truth is what Big Brother says it is. It's what the people who have the power tell you truth is. We don't want you to tell us that 2 plus 2 equals 5, Winston. We want you to really believe it. And if you don't really believe it, how many fingers am I holding up, Winston? Do you remember that before he shocked him in there? And he said, I want you to really see 4 fingers when I hold up 5 fingers. I want you to really believe it. I kind of feel like our society, in terms of ideology, is pushing ideology. And I'm not going to go into politics, so, we're not going to stray in there. But I see what's going on social media and what's going on in the larger political discourse is they want me to believe 2 plus 2 equals 5. And in conflicts around the world, they expect me to believe East Asia has always been at war with Eurasia. We were never in an alliance with Eurasia. And I kind of feel sometimes like, of course, I'm not in 1984, but I have a question that always comes up. It's like, do you guys not remember? I'm like John Kerry hugging Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. Suddenly they went from our friends to Hitler. And it's like everyone around the world that we don't like is Hitler now. Everybody, until the original character of Hitler becomes lost to time. It becomes a Big Brother-like caricature is what it becomes. So 1984, in short, caused me to, number one, realize that epistemology matters. How you know what you know really, really matters. That's what epistemology is. And the second thing it taught me is always watch out for narrative shifts. Always watch out for it. Before I did Reader's Labyrinth, I did a podcast on the Ottoman Empire, right? And so if you talk to me about Kurdistan, the Kurds, you talk to me about Turkey, all this research I've done is going to come up on that, right? But back when the Kurds were our friends in the Middle East, if we can rewind the clock about 2.5 years, everyone was up in arms on Twitter and social media about how we abandoned the Kurds, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, you guys didn't know who the heck these people were 5 minutes ago. And it's like, I saw a narrative, just turn up like that overnight on Twitter. And it wasn't based in reality. And I just kind of had that 1984 sensation. I'm like, I don't know what's really driving this, but there's a narrative that came out of nowhere. These people obviously don't know what they're talking about. And East Asia has always been at war with Eurasia. I mean, it's just the weirdest thing. I mean, so that's what 1984 did for me, Soren.
I completely. Now, how old were you when you read 1984 for the first time?
Let's see. I was in 10th grade when I had to read it, but I didn't really get a whole lot through it because I was kind of going through some stuff. Mm-hmm. So I was probably 19 when I was a freshman in college, when I really sat down with it in an English class. When we read it cover to cover, read the whole thing.
Yeah. It's kind of a tougher book to read. I read it sort of later in life when I had already become kind of cynical about society. And the government and each other, right? So I was like, oh well, this book kind of nailed it. And when you put it together with Animal Farm, of course,
oh yeah,
I think I can't even separate the two in my mind because they're so they're so prescient. It 1984, to its credit, is as depressing today as it was when it was written because it year after year it keeps nailing it, and that's what's so disturbing about 1984. Is like, yep, you don't have to look very deep into 1984 to make the parallels, and the parallels are getting a little bit stronger every day, and you can kind of thank our good buddy the digital world for that. Maybe it was tougher to have create a big brother when we were split off from each other, where we weren't feeding off each other's misinformation constantly, and now there's little big brothers everywhere. There's not just one. It's not just the government. It's everyone is acting as their own big brother now. It's a rough book. It is a rough book. It is a great book. It nailed it. It continues to nail it, and I never want to read it again.
That's a good thing. Imagine the future of humanity, Winston, is a boot stomping in the face forever. That is and I'm reminded what Ray Bradbury warned us about in Fahrenheit 451 is that it wasn't the government that started burning books. It was the people and civil groups that were doing it. And then the government later stepped in because they wanted to get ahead of that curve. There was anti-book burning and controlling ideas. But it was really pushed from the private sector. That's a lesson from Fahrenheit 451 a lot of people have missed in there. It was the private sector that started doing it. But
I want to read that one again, too. That was assigned to us in like 8th grade, and I ate that sucker up. It was a good book.
Oh, yeah, for sure on that one. Maybe that can be part of our book club again. We can kind of add it to our list on that.
I always wanted to read I never read the Martian Chronicles either on a little side, and that's always been on my list because there's a lot going on.
The Martian Chronicles, though, do you know what? I love his descriptive writing. I love his imagery. I love his, the stories in it. The only thing I'm going to warn you about is it is a downer. It is a sad, sad book. I mean, a puppy dies in every story, man. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, you better have a good cigar ready whenever you hit that one in some bourbon because it's going to be a long night.
All right, I'll steel myself. Yeah, I know Ray can get a little bit bleak.
Yeah, he can.
I'm ready for him.
Well, he can stir up that thing I should have done many years ago, and I deeply regret. And he can times it 1,000. That's what he does. He just brings it up.
Yeah.
So, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Orson Scott Cod, I think, is an interviewer pronounced it. Have you ever read Ender's Game? Have you read anything in the series, Soren?
I read it a long, long time ago. I have read it.
Okay,
it.
Cool. Sorry.
Yeah, but I'm interested, like how why did that one hit you so hard?
So it hit me hard for a couple of reasons. It was very Frank Herbert-ish in his examination of human nature. Only instead of examining it through the lens of history and religion, Orson Scott Card examines it through the lens of a child, but a child who's like really, really brilliant. So there was this theory, a military theory, that throughout human history, you would have an Albert Einstein, a von Neumann, but you could also have like a Napoleon, someone who was just a military genius. And the Earth had been attacked by a race of insect-like creatures called the buggers in the book. And they had devastated the Earth in 2 wars. And Ender is a kid, and he's with these other kids that are up in this giant space station. And the military is going through this rigorous leadership selection process to figure out which of these kids has what it takes to lead the fleet. Because the idea is that between the age of like 12 to 18, the human brain is going to be at its peak level of performance for military tactics and strategy. And so just the military strategy in there. I mean, if you're into military books, I would definitely give Ender's Game another look at. But it's really an examination of different types of leadership. You have some of the kids that are they're very strongly, they have like this technical mind. And if they're in a situation that demands somebody has a technical bent, then they do really good. But they're terrible at interpersonal conflict. They're not good at leadership from the front kind of stuff. Ender's the only one that can kind of put all the pieces together. He can kind of, weld this team around him that can eventually command human beings and their fleets to go against the buggers. And of course, there's this kind of, the buggers were really nice kind of twist ending to it. But Ender's Game was a real hard hitter for me. And it's one of those stories that's kind of like an old friend that I just, I'll be driving to work and I'll think about it. And I'll think about his buddy Bean and the background that Bean had. And Card has this ability to make his characters very believable, kind of like Stephen King does. Like you were saying, his characters are going to be the guys that you meet at the gas station. They're going to be the guys that, are your coworkers. In Ender's Game, they're human beings that are all flawed. They're human beings that all have secret agendas. But at the end of the day, it's like they're looking for something. And I don't know, it's just overall really, really great book. It is a book that has a course that's taught either at the Naval Academy or West Point now because of the leadership aspect of it. So I think it's going to be something in 50 years that's going to be right up there with Sun Tzu, to be quite honest with you. And Julius Caesar's dispatches.
That would be interesting. Like, we're going to read Ender's Game for the military.
Oh,
tactics.
yeah.
See, that's another example of, when you're too young to read a book that has layers that you just completely miss because you're just too young, and what you're looking for at that age is not quite what the author is wants to give to you. The author is not writing for you because you're looking for something. I'm sitting here reading about this, this young kid, thinking the kid's just like me, right? Like, no. You got. It's tough when you're really young to read books about people your exact age because you're always projecting yourself desperately into that character. And so Ender was a very strange kid to me because he is just so, like, they make him out to be so amazing and heroic, in that book. He's the chosen one. And I was like, wait, I'm not the chosen one. I wasn't really connecting with Ender when I read that book so much. But now I'm a completely different age, but I have a completely different perspective on that book.
It's really incredible what age can do for us. And for me, the marker of a really great book is that it grows with you. I mean, Dune is like that for me, and definitely Ender's Game is like that. So moving on, I had to throw some love out there for Gary Brandoner. Have you ever heard of him, Soren?
I have never heard of Gary Brandoner.
Oh man, that's all sad. No, I'm joking. It is perfectly okay. It's perfectly fine. So, have you ever seen the movie The Howling?
Oh yes, I have.
Okay,
sure.
At the very end of that movie, it has based on the novel by Gary Brandoner.
Right.
That's what it's got. Mm-hmm. Now, let's see here really quick. I'm going to throw some love out there for Gary Brandoner. Now, gosh, let's see. I'm trying to think how to phrase this. So I saw the movie The Howling in middle school, and it kept me up for about 2 days. Okay. I was absolutely effing terrified. I did not want to go into the woods to close the barn doors. I was terrified at night. I was like, Dad, are you serious? Oh my gosh. And I really miss that terror now. Now I'm scared of bills. I'm scared of phone calls from the doctor. I mean, it's like, I'm scared of the really scary stuff, but I'm ready for the werewolf now. Okay. But, the way the werewolves appeared was just so terrifying. I mean, the way the ears were pointed, they were always in mist, and they were relentless in the movie. So at the very end of the movie, that eerie soundtrack, when I saw based on the novel, I was expecting like the magnum opus of werewolf books. And so I went around, and finally in 12th grade, I was able, because this was when eBay started when I was in high school. Guess what? I finally found The Howling. And
look at that cover. That is so 1982, man.
It is 1982. It is ready to go. It has some of the most raunchiest sex scenes in here. It has some of the most corny dialogue that I've ever read in my life. And I read this thing in like a day. Okay. I mean, I shot through it. I mean, it was the McDonald's of horror novels. And I just read a compendium of Ambrose Bierce books, right? And so I'm like, and then it's like, I read this. And so I was thinking to myself, I'm like, which he's past, by the way, he's dead. So, but I'm going to give him some really good flex here in just a second. So everything I'm saying is going to be justified. But whenever I read the book, I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, wow. I was like, this is kind of disappointing, you know. But then I had a nightmare about it that night whenever I went to bed. And I'm like, none of the other horror books I read have ever given me nightmares. It's only been the movies. And the characters kind of came alive. And years later, I was reading on message boards how people read the book and they said, you know what, this book must be haunted or something. And they're like, I saw the movie, it scared me. And they're like, I read this book and they were kind of like, it was kind of lame. I mean, oh my gosh, what is this? This is really, but then I couldn't sleep. And they're like, it got inside of my head. So I'm just going to throw it out there for the readers. The movie follows the book almost exactly. But the movie shows, whereas Gary Brandner tells a whole lot. And I watched an interview with him before he passed, obviously, and he said of all the books he wrote, he never understood why The Howling was the one that took off and made into a movie. Now, some of his other books, like Floater and Cadaver, are really, really good horror novels. They're very, very good. They're hard-hitting. And they hit all of the green lights that I love in a good writer. But for some reason, you know, this book, you know, the writing probably isn't that great. The characters are pretty two-dimensional, but you will have nightmares. There are some scenes in there, and I don't know if I'm not exactly sure what mechanism is at play. I would be really curious if Soren could read it and kind of tell me what the heck it is, or tell me whatever strange dreams he dreams.
I'm intrigued.
But...
I mean, I have a fondness. You know, I highly recommend a book called Paperbacks from Hell, which is a really extensive survey of cheesy paperback horror novels of the 70s and 80s. How that all came to be. It shows all kinds of great covers. So it sounds like you just picked yourself up a little gem of that, because there's something, depending on what you want, it doesn't have to be really that good. Maybe that would be the good book club, as we pick cheesy horror novels from the 70s and 80s.
That's right. And then we do it. Yeah.
Covers, you know.
That's right. I love it. Yeah.
We know what we're getting into, and the prose is always a mess, but sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes it just...
That's true. Yeah.
You create your own imagery in your mind, especially after you have seen, and you know, there comes a moment in every horror fan's life when you see that first incredible werewolf transformation on screen, and The Howling had that. You can say what you want about The Howling.
Oh, yeah, it did.
But man, The Howling, was that Rob Bottin doing the...
It was, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, American Werewolf in London had a great transformation, and The Howling, you know, you can't unsee that. It was fantastic. And a good concept, too. A good, solid concept. So I'll read The Howling. See if I don't.
I will send it to you, my man. I will send it to you.
Send it to me via FedEx. I want you to spend more on the shipping of The Howling to be in the book cost itself.
So I am not ashamed to say that I have all 3 books in the Howling series that Gary Brandner wrote. I just had to go and collect them. So I still have them.
But the ensuing 2 movies, were they have anything to do with the ensuing?
They had nothing to do at all with this book. So the second book was kind of a follow-up to the first book, where it followed Karen and her eventual story. And then the third book didn't have anything to do with the first 2, but it was just kind of following the werewolves, and it was about giving them... Wait a minute, I may have lied to you. I cannot remember. They're kind of running together now, the plot lines with them. But the movies...
To believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Gary Brandoner, if you are looking down, sir, it's nothing but love, and I hope, and you have terrified so many people across the decades. I think that you deserve a little bit of heat where you can get some, but yeah, that's pretty good. So, kind of leaving that guy behind there. Let's see here real quick. Let's see if I can got it. I can always show more than I can tell. This book right here probably got me interested in philosophy right here.
Wow.
It is the philosophy found in Pink Floyd. And it is a anthology of essays that some folks in the philosophy field have written about it. And I first noticed when I was listening to their song Echoes that there was some deeper stuff going on with Pink Floyd. And I'm not going to make too much of a fuss about it at this point, but I will say that if anyone is a hardcore listener, I mean, especially their album Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, anyone can listen to that, and there's some philosophy that's going on in there. And I don't really think I have to really expand on that. But I mean, because there's the danger of a rabbit hole, Soren. I could talk about the philosophy that's present in Pink Floyd all day long. And I think you would see a lot of connection with Arthur C. Clarke. There's almost this transhumanist message that's coming through like, hey, there's this ultimate fate of mankind. But determinism and fatalism really hasn't been determined yet, and there's kind of a paradox in it. So, the music.
When I was growing up, my brother told me, he said, "You have to understand, Roger Waters is a genius." Okay,
yeah.
I didn't get it at the time because I wasn't listening to Pink Floyd, I wasn't listening to Lyric, but he was at the forefront of the Roger Waters love. So would you say, I mean, is there in terms of bands with deep lyrics that you could bend this way and that, you got Pink Floyd, you got the Beatles, but would you say that Pink Floyd is at the very top of that food chain in terms of just crunchiness that you could just pick apart and apply philosophy and religion and everything?
Oh, for sure. They are definitely at the very top. And I would say that it isn't just their lyrics, but it's the little sounds in there. And what you'll notice if you start in the album that is the Pink album that has echoes on it, and even before that with the album Hey You, there's these little subtle movements in the background. And it sounds like a xylophone playing in B flat or G minor. And these noise, they'll carry through the albums as they're released. And it's almost like they're telling a story in and of themselves. Would Pink Floyd be what they are with just the lyrics and without those sounds? I don't really think so. But if you listen to like Shine On You Crazy Diamond, there's that reoccurring, it's a synth sound like a French horn, and it plays in like this G minor throughout the whole song, right? But at the very end, when they're done with like the third movement of the song, the G minor, it turns into a sharp and it ends on this up note. And that up note is carried over into Dark Side of the Moon. And you get the resolution of this feeling. It's almost like a spirit, like what happens to the spirit. It starts off in the G sharp and it's going. You get to the third act of Dark Side of the Moon with, gosh, I am brain farting. What is the last song in Dark Side of the Moon? But you have to take my word for it and then go and verify it. But the sharp goes up an octave, and it's almost like this transmigration of the human soul. It starts in echoes, where the soul is the creature that's crawling on the banks in this primordial soup. And then it goes through, he experiences love and loss and Hey You. Then he experiences the passage of time, like the spirit realizes that it's in a human body. And then finally in the album after that, the one that has what do you want from me on it? It's like there's resolution for the spirit after that. And so So it isn't just their lyrics, but it's like the sounds in them. The sounds
So the
are a
book,
story. Yeah.
the book also goes into the actual
Yes, it
music
does.
itself.
Oh,
Okay,
yes,
wow,
it does. Oh, yes,
that's good
yeah. It
stuff.
has
Yeah,
some music. Yeah, these music. These professors, and they're breaking
yeah,
it down for you, and they have little snippets from Roger. From Waters and the bandmates, and they're talking about the concepts of it, and they're kind of teasing their listeners a little bit with it. But I was like, gosh, that is just so fucking brilliant. Oh my gosh. I was
yeah.
like, I mean, I just got chills whenever I was reading this, and just the beauty of that structure. And it's like, man, I was like, there. I mean, you can tell a philosophy and religion through music. I mean,
Mhm.
that's so cool. Yeah, I mean, that's just so amazing.
Yeah,
But yeah.
in one of my favorite movies called Metropolitan, there's a character who says that he prefers to read good literary criticism rather than the novels themselves.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it's a
Okay.
comical line,
Yeah.
but something weird has been happening to me in recent years where I think that I really kind of dig that. I like doing a deep critical analytical dive into some work without having experienced the work yet. Now I'm just a babe in the woods when it comes to Pink Floyd. I just know the hits. I've never done so. If I bet if I were to read that book right now without even having heard most of the songs they're talking about, I bet you I'd still find that fascinating. At my age, with my tastes now, that is my gig. Reading deep dives into things that I probably see. If I have experienced it, then I'll bring my own opinions in, and I won't be able to like really just appreciate the analysis. Um, that sounds. So what is the title of that book again? It's Pink Floyd and Philosophy.
Yep. The title
Yeah.
is Pink Floyd and Philosophy, and it says "Careful with that axiom," which is which is from their album. I believe it's Animals is what it is, but it's really really good. It is so cool, and it's an anthology of a bunch of different authors who are in the philosophy and the journalistic and music world, and they all kind of give their take on different aspects of it. But I
That's
found
cool.
it really, really cool, and that's the book that made me want to double major in philosophy in college. And I
Wow.
thought I would be doing a deep dive into cool stuff like that. Instead, I was doing some logic puzzles and some continental philosophy. So oh well, I can have my real education on the side here.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. It's more enjoyable. Yeah, when I one of the books my mother brought me from a yard sale, I remember was called The Parables of Peanuts. Now I was like
oh,
7,
cool, yeah.
and I thought it was just another Peanuts collection. Sure, I'll read that. But there was so much text around it. Like, what is this? I didn't realize for the longest time that no, this was a critical analysis of the cartoons viewed through the lens of Christian teachings. At age 7, I was just reading the cartoons. Like, what is this nonsensical text? Now I think I would probably find that kind of thing interesting. But I do like that whole genre of nonfiction where something very popular in the mainstream culture is taken and then really dissected and seen through a lens that you wouldn't normally stop to see it through. I approve of that genre, whatever it's called.
And what I really enjoy about it too is it isn't just idle like the speculation. Like they back up what their assertion is with like facts, and they're like, hey, if you listen to the song at this point, you'll hear this. I think it means this, So there's a little bit of umph, behind their opinions on it. But really,
Yeah.
really cool book. Really, really awesome one. So I think I have one more book on my list, Soren.
All right.
All right. I'll just hold it up for you. Hold it up. It is right here. It is called Hitler's Hangman, The Life and Times of Reinhard Heydrich, for a lightning topic right here for you. It is written by a very, very well respected historian. And I want to say he is at Munich right now. Because he was in Britain and he was teaching at the Royal Society, but then he moved to Germany and he's teaching at Munich. Really, really cool guy. It's Dr. Robert Gerwarth, I think, if I'm pronouncing that right. Good Lord, please don't let lightning strike me. And this book is important to me because, excuse me, I encountered this book a little later in life. I was in my late 20s whenever I found it. And whenever I was growing up, I was kind of grown up with history that came on the History Channel, also known as the Hitler Channel. That's what it was because,
Yeah,
but
yeah, everyone knows that joke, and
oh
everyone knows
yeah,
that
yeah.
trope. But it was true. It was true.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. And what was poisonous about that is that a lot of the depiction of the Third Reich has come to us by the Nazis themselves. We are watching old, these propaganda stills of the Nazis. Whenever you turn on if you turn on your television or Netflix series, it has the Germans fighting or whatever. Most of that was propaganda stuff. They made sure that they looked good. They made sure the lighting was good, and they made sure that they were portrayed in a way that you would remember. And so when I was growing up, I and a lot of other folks had this false side. I mean, we knew the Nazis were evil and they were responsible for the Holocaust, but we didn't really know what the Third Reich was. And so when I was in college and I was taking classes on World War II, I was struck by just how young the leaders of the Third Reich were. I mean, in my head, because I saw American movies and Western movies about the war, they had, Hitler like he was in his 70s. They had Heinrich Himmler like he was in his 80s. And Reinhard Heydrich was really high in the SS. And he was probably the he was the second most powerful man in the SS outside of Heinrich Himmler. And almost nothing was really known about him. He was assassinated in Prague in 1942, I believe, by Czech resistance leaders who were armed by the British. And I could go into who he was, but to me, the research that went into this book, it kind of spoke to me because I kind of think had I pursued a PhD in history and had I gone and studied at the University of Warwick, University at Tübingen in Germany, maybe there's an alternative universe where I could have done the primary research and written a book like this. Not necessarily about Reinhard Heydrich, but something about the war that really could have, given me a name, in the world of, of the history folk, And just kind of watching the YouTube interviews with the author and everything, I'm just struck by his, prose, his dignity, and it's just knowledge of the subject. So, whenever I read the book too, excuse me. So I guess that's a personal reason why I enjoyed it, just the sheer act of the historian's craft. But the person of Reinhard Heydrich, there was a comment when someone was conducting an interview with Adolf Eichmann, and she said a comment about the just how normal evil is and how non-extraordinary it can be. And that's kind of what I gathered from the guy. I mean, it's like he was really just a careerist, but he was also, he was perpetrating mass freaking murder. And he was just part of a regime that defaced the human soul. And so, always kind of kept that in the back of my mind. I'm like, imagine someone with a quote unquote good upbringing, a sense of morals, just how corrupted they can get because they have a taste of power. And so, on a personal level, I would have loved to had a career like Dr. Robert Gerwarth and conduct primary research, in the University of Tübingen and, living in Scotland and teaching at the Royal Society. I would have loved to have a life like that. But at the same time, the river of life will have us take other paths that we didn't expect. And had I lived a life of a historian that were writing books like this, I would probably be looking back and thinking, man, what if I had stayed in South Carolina? And, so
Oh yeah,
it's just
yeah,
a little, yeah. So
yeah. I think much of the reason that I like the ghost stories of M.R. James is because they're always about, I guess that you could call it almost like scholar porn. It's always about someone who they're a professional scholar, right? And they're just going from like town to town, getting lodgings because they're doing research on something. And
I
it's
love
just
it.
like, oh my God, like give me that life.
I know,
like,
right? Yeah.
and yeah, it is cool when, yeah, like, don't give me another book about the American Revolution. Give me a book about some obscure courier who, sometimes took letters to George Washington or somebody, and
Oh
give me
yeah,
his whole
yeah.
biography. Like, do a deep dive into that, because through that person, I will learn so much about that time. So yeah, it's great. Some of my favorite biographies will always be about the people lower down, still with some power, decision-making power, but who changed history that I didn't know, because you don't hear their names bandied about so much, and you don't have as many preconceptions of them. It's always good to read about such people in history.
That's a powerful point. Yeah. And I was kind of reminded of the internal dialogue that your character had in your Knife Point Horror Story Colony, where there were these professional these academics, and they're living in this neighborhood, and he was reminded of, hey, had I applied myself at grad school, maybe I could have been a member of that community. And reading that book, and just kind of getting lost in the footnotes and the endnotes, and just looking at his research he did on Hitler's hangman, I was like, man, had I applied myself, and maybe my life could have gone in this direction. But
yeah, when you see,
kinda...
yeah, sometimes you'll be reading a book about history, and you're so startled by the level of detail, and you immediately think of what they had to do to find this stuff out. And then when they were done, to collate all these facts into something, and to create a narrative arc so you can actually read it and it makes sense. And just like the stunning amount of work it takes to do a really deep biography of someone. But yeah, yeah, give me that life. I mean, I know
that life. Yeah, I hear it.
I'll probably hate it immediately because it's so much work. But you just think of yourself wandering the stacks of Oxford, and waking up every day and just diving back into the subject. That's what I imagine being a historian would be. And of course, I'm sure it's very, very different and tough to get published, and exhausting, like any other job.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's right. Well, I think too, like, we tend to have this romanticized version of ourselves, and it's like, man, had I only taken this step, had this door not closed, I could be blah blah blah. But I think any kind of job out there's going to be a grind. I mean, there's going to be a grind to it. There's going to be the trash that needs to be taken out. So wait, Soren, that's pretty much all I have on my list. That was kind of the end of it. That was big number 10 for me. That was.
Wow, it's been a while since I just kind of was this immersed in the world of just book talk. Good old fashioned.
Oh, I know,
book
right?
Talk without talking.
We
about.
We are going up on 2 hours too on book talk, and I'm good. I mean, I'm
yeah,
because
hey. The second this ends, it's like I'm back to flipping through the streaming channels and having good intentions to read books, and then not actually doing them. So I don't want to leave this world of where I'm a reader. As long as we're recording here on this call, I am a reader, and it all comes crashing to an end. Maybe this weekend I'll go to the library.
All right.
So yeah, that's the books. I just have to say that. Well, I'm disappointed in what I learned about you tonight, that you fake read The Hobbit. That's very disturbing, and I think the world is owed an apology. You're fine, hardworking teachers.
Yeah.
What they try to do for you, and you scam read The Hobbit. This is a dark business, Shumpert. A dark.
Well,
business.
I'll give you an even deeper aspect to it. So my brother, of course, a couple years ago, he decided to have a career switch, and he got into cybersecurity. And I was talking to him, and I said, Mike, you did your very first ethical hacking when you logged in under my username and password in 3rd grade and took that Hobbit book. And you got into the system that way. That was his very first one.
Because you did a lot of
ethical hacking. That's right.
You're pointing out a flaw.
That's it. Yeah. That's right.
Okay, right. We all justify things how we can, and that's how you wind up with Heydrich.
That's a good one.
Come full circle there. All right.
We
Yeah,
have,
that was a good talk. I like talking to. Yeah, it's fun to do a deep dive into one particular thing. I think.
Oh, for sure it is. Yeah, yes, it is. I had a blast. Well, hey, Soren, are you okay with ending it here, sir? You good?
Sure. Time for snacking. All right.
Until next time, you have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.